Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 135. Questions? Ow!
It's my turn to go, not yours. I would never interrupt and take over yours.
Sorry, Jeff.
Episode 135, World Builder's Anvil. Questions to ask yourself when starting a new world building project.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build.
Welcome back, as always.
And I'm Michael Miller. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you?
Yes, and I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram. Welcome to our show. Whoa.
Thank you for tuning in to Interrupters Anonymous.
And just to be clear
Today's
with the audience, to be clear with the audience, we're drinking coffee and water. That's it.
That's it.
That's all we need to get going.
I might have washed down 14 pills with the water, but
I don't know what they were.
Shouldn't affect my mood.
Okay.
So today's actually, I'm really interested in this type of topic. And by that, I mean, this is actually kind of a rehash. This is an old episode that Jeff did before I came to the show. And we're going to be doing this. We're going to be like taking some of those old episodes that could have been fleshed out more or just lacked in quality because of Jeff's lack of professionalism or just weren't very well thought out. And we're going to put my spin on them. And they'll be obviously fun because they're more conversational because it's the two of us as opposed to you just babbling on uninterestingly.
And I want to be a lot more specific. When I went through these originally, I was very abstract because I hate to influence people and how I do. I mean, about stuff like this.
You hate to influence people. We're on episode 135 about a show that is about helping and influencing people with their creative endeavors.
Abstractly influence people.
Okay.
I don't want.
You don't want to influence their content.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, but one of the things I want to do sort of as I go through some of these is I'll talk a little bit about my world to give specific examples.
And you don't think that'll influence?
I don't think that'll influence because I'm talking about something specifically I'm doing. But the thing is, questions and answers to these kind of questions that you should get to. And now we've already done an episode that talks about before you start the project, what you should ask yourself. So we've all gone through that and done that. We know I'm competent and brilliant. Michael is a Michael.
I do feel like some of this, there's going to be some overlap.
Yes.
So
there's always some overlap. I mean, because in theory, as you're world building, you sort of, it's an iterative process where you kind of go over questions and you get more specific and drill in deeper and deeper until you get what you want.
All right. Now, I have the show notes from the old episode, but I think this is going to go better because you already did this. If you lead and I will just make comments.
All righty. So, and the first most important question is, what are the rules that differ in your world? And it's really important if you're on Earth or you're on a different world. Universally speaking, how different is it? Now, if you're doing a world that is really fantasy based, like an Oz or down the rabbit hole, whatever that world, Wonderland, I guess.
Yeah, is there magic? Is the physics different? Is the mechanics of the world, are they dramatically different from? I mean, obviously, we're all going to think about an Earth-based norm. Mm-hmm. So because that's what we live in, that's what we're accustomed to thinking.
To identify with.
Right, but my point is that when we say different, we're obviously saying different from Earth-based norm.
How do the rules in your universe differ than the rules of the universe you live in? So,
do you think that there are actual places that have either different physics or you think something like that would be possible? Or maybe such an extreme, the things of physics that we don't deal with all the time, really extreme cases of it where that's a norm.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you lived in a world, let's say that was circling around a black hole, obviously your whole perception of time would be completely different because someone lived further around. So even in our own universe, it's different. So since we're from Earth, we have to come from this basis. But even if you're doing like science fiction, if you're working on let's say a large Gaia-sized Earth, so it's sort of like Earth, but it's much larger. The physics are going to be different. If the atmosphere has a lot more oxygen, it will be different. There are lots of things that can make it different. And if you know any of the ground rules up front, then you will have an idea of how things are going to deviate. And that's the reason why I like to start with the rules first. And like when I talk about Gardul, the rules of the universe are very similar.
To Earth?
To Earth. And it's an alternate Earth exists within the universe of Gardul. There is Earth out there, and if you ever get to the space age, you will interact with Earthlings.
Oh, your universe exists within the real universe.
Yes,
I didn't know that.
But it well, in an alternate universe, we'll say.
But my point is, it's not like you've bound it within the laws of like our existence. Like there is an Earth.
There is an Earth, and there are people on Earth, and there's a reason why they're there, because they're there.
Because they were giants.
And what are we going to do if they aren't?
Did the giants put them there? Or the dragons?
The way it works is there was a fundamental nexus point where all worlds met on Gardul, or at least that's the claim in Gardul mythology. So,
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I thought you had the sheet in front of you.
Yeah, no, that's this one. It would make sense.
Yeah, I apologize.
So there's this fundamental nexus point on Gardul that existed at some point in time, according to mythology of Gardul. And from there, giants, dragons, and life spread from one central point on Gardul, which no longer exists. And at some point, when there was the War of Rage and the asteroid came down and blew it up from whatever episode we talked about that in.
Well, I was going to say if we can have an episode number, because I don't want to get us too far off subject here, because now you're getting into history.
When that happened, life was broken up in different worlds, but it actually all originated from one spot according to mythology. So that is the brief breakdown, and that in a way is a rule of Gardul.
It wasn't that brief.
It was for me. You should know better.
I know.
Now, there is magic in my world, which you could argue whether or not it really exists. I will argue that magic as it exists in Gardul is not the same. It is much more noticeable. It is very ritual driven. You have to do ritual before or after or during, but ritual has to be performed to sort of pay the price of using magic, which is just another it's a way to tap into the physics of the universe directly and cheat, in the minds of people who can't use magic.
Do you want to pick a question for each one of these bullet points, and then we're going to answer them as they apply to Gardul?
As they apply to Gardul.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I wanted to guide us away from Gardul and talk about it objectively, or if you purposefully are talking about it specifically.
We'll hit up questions. If there are multiple questions, we might have multiple questions. If it goes too long, we'll end up cutting off. I have no idea how long this is going to take. So
okay.
And so, but that's how I deal with rules. Is I'm really deviating it from what I understand, because it will give me things to think about when I talk about other races. Now, if I take Gardul in the future, I need to know that Gardul is roughly a slightly larger landmass than Earth. And then physical strength to physical strength, because...
Are you talking about the continent is larger than Earth, or the planet. Just the planet is larger?
And it's not massively, but like gravity-wise, it's slightly higher. So you would be statistically less likely to beat someone from Gardul in arm wrestling. Mm-hmm. Just randomly picking people off the street and having them arm wrestle. People on Gardul would win slightly more often than people on Earth because of the heavier gravity from where they live.
What about the density of the oxygen in the atmosphere?
It's roughly the same.
Oh. I was going to say I was like, well, what if they were wrestling me here on my Earth? Then I would win because their lungs wouldn't be accustomed to the quantity of oxygen.
They also have
lack thereof.
They also have a better radiation belt, which means very little early on, but later on, as they start entering space, there will be a lot of religious questions coming up of how come if we break the plane of our planet and we go out to our moon, we die rapidly.
Because there's a nasty radiation out there.
Well, because the radiation's the same out there, but because they have stronger radiation belts around their planet, it's better shielded than what Earth would be. Much better shielded than, like, say, what Mars would be. So the radiation amount is roughly equivalent in space, depending on the star size of where you're at. But if your planet does a better job of shielding itself from radiation, the things that live on the surface, when they get out into space, the cosmic rays and stuff are stronger.
Yeah, they'd be more susceptible to it. I got you. So what would be the second question? But
really, like I said, there's only one question, and it's a complicated one, and we could talk a whole episode on deviations. But the idea is, for rules, are how do they deviate from what you know?
Okay, so it's not really that we're asking questions so much as we're asking one question and on these subjects? Is that
there might be one question, there could be more. It depends on the subject. And like I said, the way I like to do it is I like to go through an iterative process to figure out where I stand when I begin, because you're not starting a world building project because you know nothing about it, probably. You probably have some ideas of things you want to tinker with, and that might be very few things, or you might have a lot of ideas you're trying to fit into a world. And so the idea of breaking down your basics is getting an idea of where you start from, essentially what you need to work up.
And for those of you that are going to be participating in NaNoWriMo, a footnote, this process is a great kickoff point.
Yeah. Especially if you have no world at this point, you want to get started.
And I was talking to my wife, Sarah, about this, and I said, should I use the idea and the world that I was going to write my prior novel with, the one that is still in my mind, but I have not committed to paper? Or do I just start from scratch so I'm not hampered by the hangups that I had about having not written that one?
Yeah.
She's like, why don't you just do something new?
Yeah.
And I think I know what I'm going to write about.
Awesome.
So, and it's kind of going to be like the episode we just did, the one where we talked about, what was it? The Leftovers, where we talked about how, like, what if one thing were different in the world and you make a given thing, and the thing in that universe is like, what if 2% of the population just vanished one day?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing right now. I mean, the idea may change come November, but but the idea right now is that it's an Earth-based norm, and one significant thing is going to change.
Very interesting. The next thing I like to go into is the geography of the world, because that will define a lot about the cultures and everything else that follows. So once I have an idea of the rules and geography, essentially.
And let me make a note on what you just said. The geography is what's going to determine how the peoples and the cultures evolve.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true in a real setting.
Yes.
But in a fictional setting, if you guys just want to write it however you want to write it for the sake of doing so, you can do that. It just may not be as believable.
But some of these questions are still important, though.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
But the way I develop my world, the reason I do it first is because of what Mike says. I evolve my world. If your world's not evolved, you don't have to worry about that part of it so much. You can skip right to the end, which is perfectly fine. But however, these questions will still be relevant. And the idea is, many cultures are affected by things either in the sky, and some cultures are very astronomically based, some on the sun, some on the night sky and the moon, or some on both. So the idea is major things there, visible planets mean something. Asteroids that come close and start going through the atmosphere mean something. Meteors mean something.
And also here's a weird idea, because it just came to mind, is all of that is visual. So we're basing whatever hypothetical species is observing those bodies, heavenly bodies in the sky. Maybe the species is blind, in which case they wouldn't.
It wouldn't be, and if there's only one species, it wouldn't be important,
right?
But so if there are multiple species,
more about tactile.
But it also depends on how they perceive things. So remember, there are radio waves. There are all sorts of things that are moving through the universe. When you get to the part where you're really developing races and cultures, it's through their lens. If someone has ultra vision or infravision, their view of a night sky will be different than ours. That will change how they interact with it. And the things that they find important or not important.
So that becomes my point is that we create a chicken or an egg argument there. If you want to design the world based on what the world actually is, which from certainly an architect's standpoint is important. From a gardener standpoint, it's pretty important. But if you're going to center your story around a race that stuff wouldn't be apparent to them, then you don't necessarily have to do it. But I believe that you should, because even if they're not aware of it, they're still affected by it. Before we knew,
or they might interact with the species who is affected by
before we knew what gravity was, we were still affected by gravity.
Like, why are those people always looking up? Who cares?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I can't see them. I'm blind. What people?
So the thing is, and I talk about this in the space episode early on too, is what are the things visible in the night sky? Those are important. And most of them you don't have to worry about. Like I don't write down, I like to know the number of visible planets. I like to know things that are visible to people on the planet, and that could be added on to later on where you get a race that sees things differently. They're going to pull out different things from space than people who see it the way we do. But from my perspective, early on, what do I know? And for Gardul, it's a solar system, nothing necessarily out of the ordinary. The planets revolve very much the same way they do in our solar system. So there's nothing different there. However, my vision is there's this purple nebula in space. And it's close enough so it's like a big feature that can sometimes be seen during the day, even if it's very active.
What is a nebula?
A nebula is a series of gas and energy sort of going off. It's usually where stars are born.
So it's like a cloud of business out there?
It's a cloud of business out there. And I would think maybe realistically, if you were actually close to one, you probably couldn't see it because the particles are much further apart when you're closer to it than they are when you're far from it. But not in my world. In my world, you can see this nebula. Sometimes during the day, if it has a lot of energy activity going on into it, but definitely at night, it's a thing of the Milky Way. But besides having the Milky Way that's out there, which is the dense part of the galaxy, you have this other sort of different color that's purple that has some really prominent stars in there because there's a lot of energy being born in that spot.
It's funny because I feel like you read my mind on that when I was actually just about to ask you if your localized outer space around Gardul had any significant features that were, I was going to make a comparison to like Halley's Comet, like something you could occasionally see or something in this nebula is exactly.
There are definitely naturally occurring comets and stuff like that as well too, or bearded, I forget what they called them, bearded stars, I think is what the Chinese used to call them because they tracked that they knew Halley's Comet, a long time ago because they tracked what they called bearded stars because they didn't know what it was, but they could see it. And that meant something. And I think it was bad, but might be misremembering that.
I like bearded stars, Zach Galifianakis.
But the more focused your cultures end up
Come on, that was funny. You acknowledged that one.
Barely.
Bearded stars. Come on,
I'm very jealous
that
of
was
beards.
a fun. That
you
was
should know
that was a fun. Are you? You're jealous of them?
7 months of growth here.
That's not 7 months of growth.
Basically, it won't look much different.
You don't ever. Your beard never fully fills in.
No,
not even like what's you could do a goatee, couldn't you?
When I got out of the service, I started growing a goatee. When I was about 30, you couldn't see where it didn't fill in on the sides of my lips.
What do you mean? Like this didn't fill in?
It didn't, but the hair over was long enough that it covered up. I think right here,
right there, yeah.
It has issues. So I have.
I can get a
cheap razor budget, we'll say.
I can get a pretty good beard, but I have to let it. I really have to let it go for like a good month. And the problem is that after it gets to a certain point, it itches a lot, and I don't like it.
Yeah, no.
Like you've seen me all morning. I've been scratching my neck because my neck is all furry. What?
Okay, so back to Cosmos here.
No, Beard Talk is our new forum. No more world building. It's going to be Beard Talk and Beard Talk only.
Also, bearded stars.
Welcome to Beard Talk with Jeff and Michael.
Yeah,
we should do that. Like just one.
Actually, there's the mustache show.
No. I just realized like we should do an April Fool's episode every year.
You don't say that on air.
Where we just so cut this part. And we should just do not acknowledge anything and just do a completely different subject. We'll totally do it straight, but do like a totally different show. Like it's not this show.
I like it.
I like it too.
Okay. Now,
So that was Cosmos. What about natural wonders?
well, yeah. Just to sum up very quickly. So the idea is to figure out the things that people who are focused on the skies will see. You need to know those things specifically, and things that are different that will change people's opinions of the night sky. You really need to know. And like for me, that was the nebula. Now for natural wonders, that's your Grand Canyons. That's anything that's really impactful on the world. And early on, natural wonders are going to have a huge impact on cultures because, think if you lived in a small tribe that had no real contact with the world right on the edge of the Great Rift in Africa, or you knew there was a tribe on the other side that hated you, but it's across.
Or let's say you have a landlocked culture that's only ever been exposed to maybe large lakes and rivers that finally
see an ocean
they cover ground and they see the ocean for the first time. Like that's an amazing thing to see. And size of your planet is going to change your visibility on the horizon. Like the larger your planet is, you're going to be able to see further,
which is something to keep in mind.
Like if I'm remembering my math
about 22
correctly,
miles,
I was going to say it's about 20 miles. If you're standing on flat land or if you're on the water and you're at the water level as opposed to up higher above the water, like on a ship's mast or on a large boat, you can only see 20 miles on Earth. On Gardul, it would be a little further.
Slightly further, yep.
But if you're on something the size of Jupiter, you could see a lot further.
Yeah.
So you might only ever see a river or a lake, and then you come to what is the ocean on your world, and that might be an absolutely mesmerizing experience for a culture.
Yeah, most definitely. And beyond, but it's like it's like Mount Fuji in Japan, where you have this one gigantic mountain almost by itself that just dominates the landscape. It's the things that stick out are the natural wonders.
Sorry. To make a really great reference to a great universe and great, really well-built world is Dune.
Yeah.
I mean, you compare, what was the Atreides home planet?
I don't remember. I don't remember the names of the other planets.
I can't remember.
I remember Atreides, Harkonnen, and that's about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, Arrakis. I know the name. Why is I'm blanking on the name?
I can't help
But their home world is very much an Earth sort of world with a lot of water. Yeah. And then they go to Dune, and the cultural difference is astounding.
Yeah. And which is dry in case.
Yes. If you're not familiar with Dune, but if you're listening to the show, I would imagine you're probably familiar with Dune.
So don't stress too hard about natural wonders because they're all perspective too. The earlier the culture is, the less impressive thing might be considered a wonder. Like, oh, that hill is so high. Then they find a mountain range. They're like, oh my goodness.
And they might not a modern society, of course, when we see a natural wonder, we might just feel the awe of the beauty of a natural wonder, but we're not like so wowed by it. It's like, oh my gosh, let's build a city at the foot of this mountain because it is amazing and clearly it is a god.
Or we will protect this mountain.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
claim ownership of it.
Don't get too focused on coming up with the natural wonders unless there's something that you want to get at. Gardul, I don't really have any natural wonders quite like that, where it's like a wonder itself.
The Maelstrom?
That's not really a wonder. That's really more of a...
And it's not really natural either.
It's not natural, and it's not a wonder.
Never mind. But it is a large physical characteristic.
It is a large physical characteristic. And so essentially in Gardul, and it helps sort of tame seafariness in the world, is the sea around the Pangean continent has this thing called the Maelstrom, and it's this big dominant, it's like a hurricane all the time. Or maybe not. We're not quite sure what it is, but we know you don't come back from it.
Yeah, as someone who has experienced the Maelstrom, it is one of the scariest environments you can imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine a magical super hurricane storm with lightning and terrors in it, and that's you might be close. Kind of.
Operate differently than normal physics.
Yeah, that's why I forgot that. Yeah. Physics doesn't work the way physics is supposed to work within the Maelstrom, which is why I threw the word magical in there.
Yeah.
But that's me describing something that I don't know how it works.
And that's a very apt thing to call it magical.
Because I have characters that have experienced Jeff's Maelstrom on Gardul. I still don't know exactly what's going on in there, but Jeff does. Well, I didn't want to, let people behind the curtain because I actually haven't been behind the curtain on that one.
Now, beyond cosmos and natural wonders, the thing to think about is the general trends of the geography. How do you want it? Gardul, I wanted big, wide open areas for mounted things to move. So when you get into the middle of the world, it's very hard to start and create and maintain empires because things have this huge ability to shift around, and tribes will move around, and things will start to build up and collapse. So like there was this one sort of proto-Egyptian style culture which got wiped out very early on in its upbringing because there isn't the geography like on Earth to protect it.
I was just going to say, as soon as you said that you had an open geography, and for the listeners, I'd be surprised if you haven't picked up on this yet. Jeff is a very big fan of history and old culture and warfare. So when you said you got open geography, I'm like, I know it's going to be because of warfare. It's a great excuse to be able to change your cultures and have new cultures spring up, and also an excuse to have great wars because it's like, well, we want this land now. So you have a big army come in, and then someone else is like, oh no, but you can't keep it because there's nothing stopping us from taking it from you.
And there are a few areas that are almost isolated by very imposing mountain ranges. And even like the arm of the world has several mountain ranges that are imposing sort of all around it. And then there's a place called the Worm Range, and it looks really cool on the map if you look at the mountains because it looks like a dragon, which just kind of the way I wanted to look. But those areas, the culture is a little bit more defined and are longer lasting. But in the vast swath of things change rapidly because there's just no natural borders.
It's hard to protect
Yeah.
in open territories if you don't have like when you've got land masses that are chunked off by mountain ranges over here and an ocean over here, and
Or think about if you're invading from Europe, or not from Europe, but if you're invading from Asia to Africa, there's a pretty narrow choke point. We're in Gardul, that's thousands of miles. There's no real choke points between the Pangean continent. There are some mountain ranges that are mixed in the openness, but they're not these overwhelming giant mountain ranges. But there are some areas with really big imposing mountains, and things are more stagnant there, but there's this chaos storm outside of there.
So basically, when you're laying out your map, consider that, and we both feel this, that your geography is going to determine, or not determine, but have a very huge influential impact on the cultures.
And this is even before you're making your map. So this is just, at this point, do you have the idea that you want sort of shifting, sort of more nomadic kinds of cultures? You need more ways for them to transport around. It could be ocean going too, don't get me wrong. There might be tons of islands and more of a Polynesian style of movement getting around. But the geography should match the culture in that way. So if you wanted to design this kind of cultures, like there would be no Polynesian culture possible on Gardul as such, because ocean travel is really you don't want to go too far offshore. You really just don't. Okay. Let's see. All right. So I think I'm going to wrap up talking about
the physical characteristics of the
physical
planet.
characteristics. When we get back to this topic, we'll go over the basic questions I like to ask going into the actual cultural stuff of a world, and have some real specific questions of, what do I look for when I go into religions and languages and races and cultures and states and the people of the world. So the one thing to remember is if you're like me and you're evolving a world, the two other things you really need to understand is, where is your story taking place? If it's in the Iron Age, then, you have to figure out how does the world get there, technologically speaking. And once you have the history of the cultures and races you have developed up to that point, you know what's going to happen after that, but you need to get there for your world building to start working in a framework fashion. You need you need all of the cogs in the wheel sort of caught up. Now, if you take more of a gardener approach, which is fine too, which is my second iteration is more of a gardener approach, is when the area that you're working on for the story gets to there and you have an idea of what's around it on the map, then you kind of a starting point for that culture and you build backwards to it if you ever develop that part of the world more. So now for a world building task of the day. I don't know where I'm going to go with this. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of this, like as we're going to be leading up to it, pushes into NaNoWriMo. So I kind of want to say something about NaNoWriMo. Like, you start thinking about this. Like I've already started. I have some stuff written down on my whiteboard at home of like. This part is not quite on subject with our subject today, but the outlining. Like I've already started. I've written a list of outlines that I want to create for that. So if you're already getting into your ideas, like what type of world you want to build, then you can start doing your breakdowns. Start coming up with the rules for your world, and just because NaNoWriMo says write a novel in a month doesn't mean you can't prep a whole lot of it and even start writing it before November. So feel free. I say start doing stuff for that. Start using this exercise of creating your world and your cosmos, your natural wonders, and start thinking about that stuff that's really outside of your story now. Yep. Start, even if it's only in your head, but we believe in committing it to paper and putting it on the computer and what have you.
If you go back to the first 49 episodes, I do get specifics into some of these topics. I'll link the one today. But definitely, the world building task is to get out there and start working on your world for NaNoWriMo. Maybe you're just fleshing out something that you already have, or maybe you're creating a whole new world. If it's Earth, a fantasy or science fiction version, it's a little bit easier. If it's a whole new planet, that you got to get working. You got to get it done. And the more time you put into it, the more effort, the more story you can derive out of it later on. You will benefit by having at least basics down going into the storytelling.
So how about a real world task?
Find more ways to exercise more. Maybe it's Pokemon Go, or we talked about last time is I have a bike now, so I'm trying to get out and bike more because my knee's damaged. I need low impact exercise.
And the funny thing is like, when I arrived today, Kristen had told me that you guys bought bikes, and Sarah and I also just bought bikes.
That's funny. Yeah.
You knew that, right? I told you that. I sold.
Well, I knew. I didn't know you had just bought them, but yeah.
Well, I told you I sold $1,700 worth of magic cards to buy $1,400 worth of bikes.
I didn't realize that's what you had.
I thought maybe I just told Kristen.
Okay.
I don't know.
I wasn't out there.
Yeah, we just no. This part of the conversation would have occurred like a week or two ago.
Okay.
But yeah, Sarah and I just bought bikes, like really high-end Cannondales.
Yeah.
So maybe we should go biking sometime.
Yeah, maybe we should go biking. And
you know what we should do? We should go to that Farmington Trail, and we'll take you to that restaurant I was talking about.
Okay.
We should totally do that.
We'll have to figure that
between now and then, and I'm thinking we can probably do something in.
But don't Pokemon Go and bike.
I'm absolutely doing that. I mean, not quite. Like I'm getting a mount for my phone for the handlebars.
Oh, jeez.
Seriously.
Which is better than in your car. Definitely don't do it in your car. Definitely don't do it in your car.
Yes, that would be safety irresponsible and illegal. But yeah, so go get some exercise.
Yeah. And as always, make sure to go to Gardul.com. That's Gardul.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us in this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.